As we've been hearing in the news, 4 months after the 2010 budget proposal was presented to the National Assembly by the presidency, the lawmakers yesterday passed it, but with an additional 500 billion naira expenditure, raising the figure from just above 4 trillion naira presented by President Umaru Musa Yar'Adua to just over 4.6 trillion naira yesterday. Bismarcke, Rewane, CEO of Financial Derivatives, joins us now to provide his take on what's been released. Thanks so much, Bismarcke, for joining us this afternoon. Well, overall impressions with the spike higher of that total budget figure that we've seen being released?
Yes, I think it's to the extent that it's counter-cyclical and it expands the deficit. It's good in terms of trying to counter the effect of an economic slowdown. So definitely it's worthwhile. But I must point out that it's not the nominal quantity increase in expenditure that is important. It's the quality of expenditure and the integrity of those numbers, and the fact that we might also see there's a risk of leakages in this budget.
Let's look at the quality of those expenditures that have been issued here. I mean, we've got MDAs with the highest allocation in the 2010 budget, ranking as education, defense, police, health, power, then agriculture and water and transport. What's your sense of how the money is being allocated?
Yes, again, the allocation is not bad. I mean, relative to one another, I mean, education is important, power is important, defense in the context of what's happening in Niger Delta is important. But again, allocating money is one thing, getting the bang for the buck is another. That is, what are you spending on and how much are you going to achieve at the end of the day? The average implementation success rate for the budgets in Nigeria is about 40%. Mm-hmm. But what is important here is that we are seeing a growth of 82% in capital expenditure, which is really the driver of the investment multiplier in terms of having an increase in expenditure, having an impact on growth.
Well, implementation has always been an issue with regards to Nigeria's budget, effectively directing those funds in the correct manner and then using it appropriately as well to achieve some of the targets and goals that have been set. With the fact that we've seen major reforms taking place in government, what are where are your confidence levels sitting right now in that regard?
I'm not too sure about the reform agenda as such. But what I'm saying is that right now we have a government increasing its expenditure profile by 82% in a year preceding an election. Chances are that this expenditure is going to be administered by outgoing elected officials. And the closer an official is to his exit, the higher the level of leakage in the expenditure profile, especially if these elected officials are seeking re-election. Mm-hmm. So I have problems with the integrity of the implementation process. And that's a major risk. But based on the numbers themselves and based on the relative allocation, it's good. And I think it's what is required, especially in a time of a credit crunch in the monetary sector, which is in the banking sector. If you have this counter-cyclical spending, which includes the fiscal stimulus, which includes things on the Niger Delta, and the money can actually get there and be used for what it's actually allocated for and used efficiently. I mean, this could be the beginning of a recovery and a long-term sustainable recovery story in Nigeria.
Well, you've highlighted just one of the risks that this budget presents. Also, the additional expenditure effectively raises the deficit to more than 5% of GDP, and concern has been raised of the strong inflationary pressure on the economy that this is set to have. Do you share those concerns moving forward?
It's interesting that the government itself increased its forecast for inflation from 8% last year to 11.2% this year. On the upside, we, at my firm, we think that inflation would peak at about 15%. But if well managed, we may have it at about 11%. You see, you've got to trade off something. You can't have rapid growth without some inflationary pressure. How you manage inflation is important. Mm-hmm. But the important thing here is that we are beginning to see low interest rates, quantitative easing. If you add the quantitative easing of the bank restructuring program and the the support of the rescued banks, to the deficit funding as a result of the fiscal plan, that could be a real inflationary bomb that is waiting to explode at the end. But I think the central bank has the capacity to manage and rein in the inflationary pressure by doing some things, using the inflation targeting framework, which is what they have basically adopted.
Well, certainly 6 minutes, not enough time to unpack the entire budget that was released yesterday, but just looking very briefly at some of the other changes, the oil price benchmark has been increased by $10 a barrel to $67 a barrel. Is that reasonable in your books, going by the current oil price of about $80 a barrel, but also considering that there are some forecasts for decreased demand on a global scale?
I think that is a major cause for concern. The normal headroom we have between the budget fiscal price and the actual price is usually about 40 to 50%. So when the global price is around 70, we normally come in at about 35 or 40. But now the headroom we are talking about is less than 15%. That doesn't give you enough room for volatility in the oil markets, especially when you see that if Iraq comes back into production mode, then we could have some pressure on the oil price. And then it could come down to $60 or something like that. Nigeria can get by at $60. But what it means that the excess crude account, which is now down to zero, is going to have no accretion at all. And that is the shock absorber and the cushion which we use to manage the swings in expenditure excesses during the year without actually passing a supplementary budget. So there is a concern, one, for the funding sources, and two, for the inflationary pressure that will come about due to actual printing of money, which is going to take place during the year.
Well, Bismarcke, as I said, certainly not enough time to unpack all the detail, but at least a broad glimpse of your perspective on that budget which was released. Thanks so much.